This is Radio Cycling.
So I've been working on this story myself in collaboration with Cycling Weekly's Tom Thulis, and I'm delighted to say that Tom is able to join us now. Hello, Tom. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Tom, what started off as a rumour about major problems between British Cycling and Sweetspot exploded into a big story on Tuesday last week. It all seemed very sudden, but in hindsight, the writing has been on the wall for a while now.
Yeah, that's right. I think earlier this week it definitely did feel like that, didn't it? Like it was very sudden and dramatic and really sprung up out of nowhere. But I've had a lot of extensive conversations now since we broke that story, and they've all shown me that Sweetspot were well aware of this issue for a while now. So to me, it feels like this was always going to happen. It was inevitable. And maybe there was a little bit of burying heads in sand going on and false hope that this would just disappear. But obviously, in reality, it doesn't work like that, does it? So BC ended up being forced to play the card that they did.
Obviously, Cycling Weekly has a strong grassroots British audience who love both the men's and women's Tour of Britain. What's been the reaction and response of your readers to this news?
Well, that's a tricky one, to be honest. I think the issue is here that there is still quite a lot of bad feeling towards BC hanging around within the cycling community. I think that extends back to all of the controversies that they've faced in recent times and that have been documented in the media. I think at times, occasionally, that's coloured people's reactions to this, and that's certainly been clear. A lot of the feedback we've had has been quite negative towards BC, and then there's been the occasional comment as well where people have said, well, the Tour of Britain was boring last year, so it doesn't really matter. But I think ultimately you need to look at the bigger picture with this, don't we? And most of the conversations I've had with people this week have really shown me that actually there's a lot of support for BC on this one and sympathy towards them, I suppose, within cycling. A lot of people think that they were faced with no choice in doing what they did, really.
Okay, so both sides have said that the dispute is in the hands of their lawyers, but British Cycling have also stated that they aim to deliver a Tour of Britain in 2024. Now, do you have any insight into how this might happen or who the promoter could be if it's not Sweetspot?
To be honest, I think that's probably too early to say on that one, certainly from my perspective. I know BC's statement was very clear, wasn't it, in the sense that they said they're fully committed to this. And I mean, of course, there'll be some scepticism towards that, and people may think that's quite a bold claim to make at this stage. But on the other hand, I personally don't think that they would have put that out if they didn't have a solid plan in place, particularly because of the difficulties they've had in recent times, like I've just mentioned. But no, that's for me still quite unclear. So it's going to be interesting to see how that develops.
I mean, we haven't heard any names in the frame, have we, at all? There's no rumours of any.
No, that's right. I mean, I know you've had similar conversations to me, and it feels like at the moment we're still trying to dig a bit further with that one. Like you say, there's no names out there that have been directly mentioned to myself, and it's still unclear. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops.
Okay, so British Cycling own the rights to the Tour of Britain, but not to the Women's Tour, which means that the Women's World Tour event could still conceivably be promoted by Sweetspot next year. But is that still a real possibility?
Well, that's an interesting one, because speaking to people, I know that they had a fair few venues lined up for the race that didn't happen this year. And from what I gather, those agreements may well have been rolled over to next year to enable the race to take place. So the venues may well be there and be ready to go. But then on the other hand, you have to look at it, don't you? And you have to think, well, hang on a second, they allegedly owe all of this money to British Cycling. Therefore, if they end up being forced to repay that somehow, I mean, I'm left thinking, is there going to be anything left in the pot to get the race on? So as it stands, I think it's in the balance, really. And
okay,
we'll certainly know more.
Well, last thing, do you think, on your instincts of everybody you've spoken to in the past few days and all the feedback you've got from people and the concerns that have been expressed, do you think that there will be a men's and women's Tour of Britain next year, or are things so bad now that both races are in reality beyond saving?
Well, for me personally, my gut feeling is that the men's race won't happen. I think that despite what BC have said, I think potentially these legal proceedings, which we know are going on, they're going to rumble on for quite some time. So I think that the race won't happen next year while this is resolved. And I'm not saying it won't then happen again in the future, but my gut feeling is there'll be a gap of a year at least. And as for the women's tour, I think it will take place, because I think, given the fact it's got that World Tour status, hasn't it? I think people will really be keen to ensure that that goes ahead at all costs, because it's had so much success since it started out. So I think a lot of people within cycling would be really keen to keep that on the calendar.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Thanks. Cheers, guys.